We're live.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Committee of Adjustment meeting and our regular council meeting for Monday, March the 14th. We'll get kicked off right away with Committee of Adjustments. We'll call that meeting to order at 6:30. Tonight we have a public meeting under Section 45 of the Planning Act to consider a minor variance application. Minor variance application A22-02 is for the property located at 641 Canfield Place within the town of Shelburne. The purpose and effect of this application is to request relief from Section 5.68 of zoning bylaw number 38-2007 in order to construct a converted dwelling with a second dwelling unit in the cellar of the existing detached dwelling. The application is seeking relief from the regulation which states that a dwelling unit shall not be located in the cellar of the dwelling. I'll ask the clerk to provide the method for notice for tonight's public meeting.
Notice of tonight's public meeting was advertised in local media sources. Notice is posted on the Town of Shelburne website, and property owners within a 60-meter radius have received notification.
Okay, thank you. We'll have a short presentation from our town planner who will provide a written or a summary rather of written comments received. And following that, there will be an opportunity for committee members and any members of the public who are signed in to provide comments or to ask any questions. So Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. A quick presentation here that I'll share on the screen. Did that come up?
Yeah.
All right. So the application file number is A2202, and it's for the property located at 641 Canfield Place. And the subject of the minor variance is relief from provisions for a secondary dwelling unit within the existing home. So just to provide a bit of context for the location, the subject property is at the southwest corner of Greenwood Street and Canfield Place. You can see it's an existing single detached dwelling. It has a driveway on Canfield Place, on the south side of Canfield Place, as well as an attached two-car garage. So between the garage and the driveway, at least 4 cars can be parked in front of the dwelling. And as you can see as well, there's no sidewalk on the south side of Canfield Place, which does provide a bit more parking area as well. Currently, the main entrance to the dwelling is on the east side. So although the front of the property is on Canfield, the dwelling is kind of oriented with its front facade towards Greenwood Street. You can see as well, it's within an existing neighborhood, primarily comprised of single detached dwellings. So this is turned 90 degrees to the left, showing the positioning of the existing house on the property. This is a sketch provided by the applicant with the application. The lighter gray with the 2 pink boxes is the existing attached garage. So what they're showing here is that there is room for both the 1 parking space required for the existing dwelling, as well as a second parking space for the proposed apartment in the basement. That will satisfy the zoning requirements. And additional to that, there is room in the driveway, as mentioned, for parking. So there'll be no changes to the exterior appearance of the dwelling from Greenwood Street, which is at the top of this drawing, or from Canfield Place, which is to the left side. However, at the back or south side of the house, they will add a separate entrance into the basement. So a set of stairs is proposed, basically going into the grade at the back of the dwelling, and with a new door proposed to be constructed off the back wall. So this is the proposed lower level or basement floor plan. The proposed apartment would be a 1-bedroom apartment. So the bedroom is here, kind of in the north side of the house. And then the entrance, as mentioned, would be at the back of the house here, or the south side, into kind of a living and dining area. And then the kitchen open to that. There's a hallway and access to laundry facilities, stairs, of course, going into the main level of the dwelling. as well as the utility room and the single bedroom and some closet space. So I will note that the basement is already finished in this house. We did receive, as part of the application and included with our report in the agenda, is the current configuration of the lower level of the dwelling. So there is already living space. This would just make it usable as a separate dwelling unit within the existing house. This is really the reason for these variances. We've had a number of them over the past couple of years. It stems from the definition of basement and cellar in the zoning bylaw. So basement is defined as something that we wouldn't conventionally consider as a basement, but many zoning bylaws in the province do this for various regulatory reasons. The way a basement is defined is if just part of the height of the story is below grade, then it's considered a basement, as long as at least 50% is above grade. And then if it's more than 50% below grade, it's a separately defined term referred to as a cellar, or defined as a cellar in the zoning bylaw. And why a variance is then required to put an apartment in the cellar as defined is that the bylaw also regulates that no dwelling unit is allowed to be entirely within a cellar. And this is a zoning provision that we anticipate will need to change with the next update to the zoning bylaw, or even before that, because it's really not, it is very restrictive to the dwellings in town that can be used for a basement apartment. And the Planning Act does prescribe that the town shall make provision for second units within existing homes. From the building fire code and electrical safety code perspective, there's no reason to have these provisions. They don't relate to any building code requirements. So long as whether the unit's in a basement or a cellar as defined, you can still accommodate a large enough window for egress, which can often be achieved either with the amount of space that's above grade or with a window well. Servicing capacity has been a bit of a constraint to these kinds of things, or was becoming a constraint towards the end of last year. In May of last year, council allocated or reserved a total reserve of 10 cubic meters per day of wastewater treatment capacity for infilling within the stage 1 and 2 area, including secondary units within existing homes. And you can see the list since then that have been approved. And many of these have since been allocated and given municipal approvals for building permits. So as it stands today, there are, of the approximately 30 units that could be accommodated through that reserve, 9 of them have been allocated. And with the one tonight, that would be a 10th, leaving approximately 20 units remaining in the reserve. So I'll just stop sharing the presentation, and I can come back to any of those slides if the committee would like. Just to summarize the submissions received on the application, we did receive one public letter from a resident in the area. I think they live on the opposite side of Greenwood Street. There's no address provided in their submission. But they did note a couple of concerns with respect to the proposal. One was they would like to know where the entrance for the apartment will be, and so we have responded and identified that on the plan. They did indicate a concern that the renovations have already started because they noticed some construction activity. So we're not aware of that. That hasn't been verified by staff, but we have indicated that that could be filed as a complaint, and the building department would then be notified if there's concerns about construction activity already taking place. They also indicated that there's already parking issues on Greenwood Street. So another apartment is of concern for the potential for more parking issues. And then there were 2 other concerns, and they're not really related to this application for an apartment, but the one was that there was, I guess, some observation or a claim that there was a block of the drainage ditch behind this house. There's no indication of timing of when that might have occurred, but town staff haven't been able to verify whether that took place, and prior to this letter, we weren't really aware of that concern, but something that could certainly be looked into. And then finally, there was a concern from this neighbor about a perceived business being run out of the garage for a period of time. It wasn't clear if that's still a concern or if that was just for a certain period of time, and that some of the waste from that food business being run out of the garage was being dumped between the homes. So again, none of that has been verified. That's just some concerns we received in one submission from one member of the public. We have not received any other public submissions, but we are here tonight to hear any other public comments from residents. And then we did receive a number of agency responses as well. The county building department reviewed the plans and indicated no comments or concerns, and just reminded us and the owner that a building permit application will be required for the proposed renovations. County planning confirmed that the proposal is consistent with their official plan at the county level, as it supports intensification and increased housing supply within the existing built-up area. The NVCA and risk management official indicated no concerns from a source protection standpoint. The Director of Development and Operations indicated no comments or concern, and the Township of Amarant replied as well, indicating no comments or concerns. So you'll see in my report, we've provided an analysis of the application of the 4 tests for a minor variance that apply to any minor variance application. And those tests are set out in the Planning Act. We have addressed those tests in detail with the information provided by the applicant. And I'm happy to answer any questions should you have any about that review. And if there are any questions from either the committee or the public tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So just to be clear, the recommendation is that we do grant the relief sought on 2 conditions. One is verifying that the allocation is available, and the second, obviously, is just that the owner obtain the required building permit, but before they go ahead and do it. Any questions from the committee? Member Bonato?
Just a quick question. On the entrance on the south side, I walk that street quite a bit, so I know that house quite well, and I know the owner quite well. Right now, there's a shed back there with some gravel, stones, I think almost within the same area, and there's a deck behind that in the same area. Is that to be removed before those stairs goes in?
Jennifer, I don't know if the owner is on the call.
I don't see that anyone has signed in.
Through the chair to the member, we can certainly inquire with the owner about that, but it wasn't indicated that any removals were proposed exterior to the house, other than obviously the excavation that would be needed for putting those stairs in. But I would think if there's anything back there already that would be in the way of that proposed stairwell, then they're going to have to relocate it or remove it. But to date, there's been no plan provided on either relocating an existing shed or removing an existing shed. So that's something we can confirm.
I think Jim might remember just as well as I do, because they had to go out and look at that because of the amount of stone and drainage that was where the shed was put in that area. There was some concern about the drainage there. So that shed is there, and the deck is also back there, and I know that for a fact. So my concern is that would have to be removed, I'm gathering, before any stair can go in there. I have no issue with the approval of the apartment in the basement, and the neighbor is quite correct. The work was done ahead of time.
Okay. I'm assuming that perhaps relates to concern that the neighbor expressed about potentially blocking some drainage. Yeah,
there's a pipe coming out right onto, and there's water consistently on the sidewalk from the drainage that comes out of that particular area. So that's one of those areas of icing that I get concerned about on Greenwood Street that consistently builds up because of the drainage that comes out from there. So the neighbor's quite correct. There is a drainage issue in the area there. That backyard is lower than his neighbor behind him, and there's a bunch of built up stone wall that was built into that area. So that's why he put in the stones and whatever he had to do to build up the area for the shed for proper drainage within the area. So if he's building a stairs within there, I'm assuming he's going to have to tear something apart back there to make it available for that exterior entrance to go in there.
Is it just like a typical sort of garden style shed?
It's a wood building, Your Worship, that was built like a wood shed. I think you've seen them over at Home Hardware and areas like that was built within there. And that's where he had built in behind there. But he laid quite a layer of stonework, stones, gravel stones or whatever underneath the shed before he built the shed on top, or had somebody build it. So yeah, that's the area. And there is a pipe coming out there, like I said, with water that drains from underneath that area there.
Okay. Steve, I'm assuming that the new entrance and the new stairway would be covered under the building permit?
Yeah, that's correct. And we will ensure that Jim gets a look at that as well, so that if there's any grading changes or drainage impacts, that's understood and addressed as part of the plans that are submitted for the building permit.
Okay, so that can all be covered sort of through that process.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from the committee for Steve? Okay. Jennifer, I know you said you didn't see anybody on from the public, but we'll just ask once more for posterity. I'm assuming nobody's logged in.
No members of the public have joined for tonight's Committee of Adjustment.
Okay. All right. So as I mentioned earlier, the recommendation is that we approve the request. Is there a motion to that effect or otherwise that anybody'd like to make?
I'll make it, Your Worship.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Member Hull. Okay, so the motion moved by Bernardo, seconded by Hull, reads as follows. After considering the application, the committee is satisfied that the request is minor in nature, desirable for the appropriate and continued use of the subject property, and maintains the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw and official plan. Accordingly, the committee resolves to grant the request. The minor variance is granted in accordance with the sketch plan provided to the committee and attached here too, only to allow the existing single detached dwelling at 641 Canfield Place to be used as a converted dwelling with a maximum of 2 dwelling units, no more than one of which may be located within the lowest floor level of the existing dwelling in an appropriately designed and finished habitable space that meets building, fire, and electrical safety code requirements, and subject to the following 2 conditions. Number 1, that the owner shall obtain confirmation of sufficient reserve servicing capacity by the town engineer for the stage 1 area and allocation of servicing for the additional residential unit prior to municipal approval of the building permit. And number 2, that the owner shall obtain a building permit for the additional residential unit within 1 year of satisfying condition 1, failing which the servicing allocation shall be revoked and this minor variance shall lapse unless the committee grants an extension prior to expiry. Any questions or comments on the motion? All in favor? It's carried. Okay. That was it, Steve, for Committee of Adjustment?
Yep, just the one tonight. Thanks.
Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn Committee of Adjustment? Moved by Hall, seconded by Fegan. All in favor? It's carried. All right. Okay, so on to the regular council meeting. We call that meeting to order at 6:49, and we'll begin with playing of the national anthem. Thank you. And at this time, we would also like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Chippewa, and the people of the Three Fires Confederacy. Just a standard reminder to members to declare pecuniary interests either now or when the matter arises, and that those interests must be declared both verbally and in writing, which can be filed with the clerk. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the regular council meeting held February 28th, 2022? Moved by Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Fegan. Anything anybody want to discuss about those minutes? All in favor? It's carried. Jennifer, were there any questions submitted tonight?
Not this evening, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. We have two proclamations this evening, one which was contained in the agenda, and then a second one which was a bit of a later addition. The first one is for Essential Workers Day of Appreciation, which is on March 17th, 2022. Whereas essential workers risk their health and safety daily in order to keep us safe, and whereas many were asked to stay at home and practice social distancing, others continued to work and provide essential services to the community, it's important that we honor and pay tribute to these incredibly brave and dedicated essential workers for keeping our community functioning during these unprecedented times. And whereas essential workers are heroes and are providing exceptional service to our citizens during the COVID-19 pandemic, they often make significant personal sacrifices to serve us. And whereas we owe a profound debt of gratitude to every single essential worker who continues to ensure our community keeps moving and residents have the food and supplies they need every day. Now, therefore, in order to reflect upon the contribution of essential workers and to give residents the opportunity to recognize and discuss the importance of essential workers, the town of Shelburne proclaims March 17th, 2022 as Essential Workers Day of Appreciation. And again, I'd like to thank Councillor Wagner, who brought that one forward last year. This is the second year that we've made that proclamation. The second proclamation this evening is for Crossing Guard Appreciation Day, which is on March 23rd. Whereas the Ontario Traffic Council School Crossing Guard Program Committee, of which the town of Shelburne is a member, has proposed that Crossing Guard Appreciation Day in all participating municipalities across the province be declared on Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022. And whereas each and every school day, dedicated individuals, whom we call crossing guards, commit their attention and energy to assisting pedestrians across busy streets as they arrive and depart from school and work. And whereas the town of Shelburne and the Shelburne Police Services Board places a top priority on pedestrian safety, and whereas crossing guards play a critical role in ensuring the safety of pedestrians, and whereas crossing guards must have a deep sense of responsibility, a great deal of character, an excellent relationship with children, and the dedication necessary to brave inclement weather, and whereas the town of Shelburne and Shelburne Police Services Board are proud of our crossing guards and commend them highly for their continued commitment to the safety and well-being of pedestrians, and whereas we invite all citizens to recognize these individuals for their commitment to the safety of pedestrians, now therefore I, Mayor Wade Mills, do hereby proclaim March 23rd, 2022 as School Crossing Guard Appreciation Day in the town of Shelburne. So on March 23rd, if you happen to see a crossing guard or perhaps make a point to make sure you do see one, give them our thanks. It certainly is an important job, and as the proclamation says, these folks are often out there in nasty weather, making sure that our kids can get to and from school safely. So certainly have our appreciation. Are there any council inquiries for this evening? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. And I too was not aware of this day, so I'm glad that you did the proclamation.
I think it might be new, but that's good.
Yeah, it's they're certainly deserving of it, that's for sure. So I want to start off by stating the obvious. I think we've all, in some form or fashion, have been impacted by the pandemic, whether emotionally, physically, and certainly financially. And that's certainly true for our sporting clubs here in town. And so I'm not sure whether we've had this discussion already, but I just bring it up just in case. Yes, we are transitioning, it appears, to post-pandemic, if we want to put it that way. And a lot of our clubs will be coming back online this spring, summer, etc. And I would think that they would probably need some financial assistance on behalf of the town in the sense of their fees. And again, if we haven't discussed this already, I'm just putting it onto the table to suggest that we try to help them as much as possible, just for maybe this year, not ongoing, to help them financially, either by reducing the fees for this year or potentially eliminating the fees just for this year, so that they can sort of get their footing underneath them. So I just put that out there for discussion, or maybe to inquire from staff, since this is council inquiries, as to whether we've had this discussion, and if not, then maybe if I need to bring a notice of motion, I'll certainly do that at the appropriate time.
Okay, Denise.
Thank you, through the mayor. So in the past, due to COVID, the council directed us to provide relief. There was no adjustment made this year. And in fact, some of the fees were adjusted by the COLA, so a 2% adjustment. Additionally, the province recently announced that they would be providing funding relief to a number of Sport Ontario registered or recognized provincial organizations, or NGO or NSOs. And in turn, they would have to trickle that money down to their respective community organizations to help them offset their costs and their reinstatement of their organization and their sport. So we're not sure of how that 20 million will be distributed across the province, but that certainly is intended to do exactly what you've outlined, is to provide some financial relief to the organizations due to COVID and helping them rebound.
See that our treasurer has come online. Maybe Carrie has a few more details.
I just wanted to update council on the what we did budget for 2022 with respect to parks rental fees. Normally our budget would sit at 16,000 for that type of revenue. And in 2021, we dropped it to 8, and we've left it at 8 for 2022. Now we did waive the fees last year, so we did not meet that predicted revenue. So whether we do this year or not remains to be seen, but it is still cut in half from what we would normally budget.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's fine. So, so in essence, just so I'm clear, that the mere fact that it's cut in half, would that mean that they're not paying what they would normally pay outside of the pandemic? Is that the understanding?
No, I think we left it in half because we were unsure at budget time where we would be at by the time that this season rolled around, and we weren't sure which groups would be returning.
Yeah. Okay. I'll leave this before I transition on, Mayor. It's my only concern is there may very well be that funding relief, but we know at times, especially when we're relying on funding from the government, how slow down the pipes that actually comes in, whether or not they'll be able to get that funding when the season starts, et cetera. And so I just wonder, even though that may be coming, whether there's an appetite to assist them on our end, again, just for this year. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll decide whether or not I should bring it up as a notice of motion or not.
Just before you jump on, Denise, do we have any sense of when we might be getting some more details on that provincial funding?
Through yourself, through the mayor, we just have the announcement, and how they administer, we can look into it. But again, it will be, I think, a while before the PSOs, the provincial sport organizations, then trickle that down. And the thing is, the community sport group has to be a formally recognized sport of their PSO. So if they're unrecognized and might be running independently, they wouldn't be eligible.
Okay. So I guess, the fact that we've only budgeted kind of half of what we normally do kind of assumes that, one of two things would happen. Either that relief could be granted, or there just won't be as many organizations renting the facilities as they would normally. So I guess, Deputy Mayor, from your perspective, I guess you could consider two things. One, sort of a blanket motion to consider, fee reductions across the board, or potentially leave it up to each individual organization to request relief on an as-need basis. I think personally, I might prefer that latter option. And then it just gives us more flexibility to kind of assess things on an individual basis. But anyways, I leave that to you. If you want to bring something forward during the notices section, we can deal with it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Was there anything else? Any other inquiries? No? Okay, all right. Well, we'll jump right in. So the first report is from the town planner regarding the Centerville Homes development at 600 Main Street. And they are seeking some extensions to the conditions with respect to the draft plans of subdivision and condominium. So Steve, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Mills. Yeah, so the report that's in your agenda package, number P 2022-07, is really for two purposes. The first is that the owners for 600 Main Street East have requested a one-year extension of both the draft plan of subdivision and draft plan of condominium that were approved in 2018. And then the other purpose is there is a subdivision pre-servicing agreement now ready for council consideration for that development. So the report provides some background on the development. You're likely familiar with the site by now. It's just east of the Besley Drain on the north side of Main Street. It's proposed to be built very similarly to how the Scone development on the west side over by the former rail corridor is being developed. So it's a subdivision with townhomes, but instead of a typical municipal road and services, it would be accessed by a common element condominium road owned jointly by all the unit holders. So this development is larger than that one. It has 58 total townhouse units. It has been received very well. We were told by the owners that, in fact, the units have all been taken up through purchase offers. Things have moved more slowly over the past year than I think any of us hoped, not at their fault entirely. It's a function of the detailed engineering and landscape design process has been slower than it would be in normal times. And that is a reflection of both how busy things have been for everybody on both sides in terms of the applicants, experts, as well as the consultants and staff working for the town, as well as the agencies, the NVCA and others in their timelines and trying to keep up with all the work, and some impacts as it relates to COVID, of course, where much of the last 2 years people were balancing home and work responsibilities and trying to work with kids at home and that sort of thing. So they have made, notwithstanding all that, they have made really good progress with 3 complete engineering submissions provided to the town. And we are almost ready to issue comments on the 3rd, which will bring them very close to having a final engineering design approved for the site. It is at a stage now, as I say, where we're ready to recommend that the town enter into an agreement with the developer for servicing work to commence. And the owner is looking to commence some additional vegetation removals, and then followed by pre-grading and installation of water, wastewater, and base roads starting in the spring, so in the coming months. The pre-servicing agreement is typical to the type of agreement that you've seen in other developments. It's based on the one that we did with Scone, so it covers the same kind of scope of work. There will be erosion and sediment controls put in place to make sure there's not runoff onto adjoining properties and not silt-laden water going into the Besley Drain, and that all of that is protected. There'll be a temporary sediment basin to collect that runoff as the snow melts and as the rainy season starts to create that runoff. There'll be some rough grading and of course the installation of the underground services. Fire hydrants will go in as well to make sure all of that is ready for when they get further along and are ready to start building the homes, so that there's emergency access to the fire supply. And the agreement also obviously sets out all the requirements that the owner has to fulfill related to maintenance of the works and having them inspected and having the town forces out to look at things before services are backfilled and that kind of thing. There is a financial impact, of course, as we move forward when they get to a building stage, which will be subject to further, there will be development charges. But in the meantime, there's a development agreement fee to cover the cost of preparing the agreement, as well as a deposit to cover the town's expenses for administering the agreement, as well as attending the site to inspect the work as it progresses. This report's been prepared in consultation with the town's engineers, as well as the Director of Development and Engineering and the owner's consultants as well. So there are some attachments to the report. You'll see a copy of the draft plan of subdivision, which shows the layout of the roads and the blocks, as well as the draft plan of condominium, which shows the parts that will be owned in common by those unit holders. And then the letter received from Innovative Planning Solutions on behalf of the owner, and a copy of the pre-servicing agreement and the authorizing bylaw for that agreement as well. So you will recall a year ago, a similar request was made. And at that time, there hadn't been as much progress, although the owner had been in a mode for quite some time to try and find a builder to work with. So that builder is still part of this project. It's Centerville Homes. They have designed all the units. And now that they're getting ready to service the site, that will really set things in motion for construction. I will note one of the questions that was asked when we were at council last year with this was the status of the pedestrian bridge, which is required as part of this development. So that has been the subject of ongoing review over the past year. And we have worked with the NVCA, the town's engineers, as well as the developer to finally locate the optimal spot to position that across the Besley Drain. So it'll be just off of the condominium road along a trail that will run alongside the Besley Drain. And then it'll cross west of Centennial Road, just outside of the industrial area, and go straight north into the industrial park, west of where that existing driveway crosses the creek up into the wastewater treatment plant. So it'll stay well away from the wastewater treatment plant area, but provide a convenient walking route connected to the broader trail system up into Greenwood Park. And then from there, the developer's responsibility will end just north of the creek, and the town can carry on with additional trail development through Greenwood Park to connect to the north part of the park from there. So that'll be a nice feature to have added to this area as well. So I'll pause there, and if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you. Steve, I just want to confirm, because you may recall a lot of people have approached me with respect to that project, and particularly whether or not they had started selling because they hadn't seen any signs. So I just wanted to confirm. So what you're saying is, because I think there's a total of 58 units, I think you had mentioned. And so are all those already accounted for? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what we were advised by the owner.
Okay, excellent. Yep. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Buffett.
Yeah, I did have a question regarding the timing. This would be to do this for another year. What's the reason for the year timing? Like, is it not possible if we say no, for example, for them to continue on and then come back to us in a few months' time?
Under the Planning Act, you have to request the extension before the draft plans expire. If they expire, they lose all status, and then they would have to file brand new applications starting all over again. Have to go back through the notification agency review and the Planning Act public notice requirements, as well as public meetings. So it definitely adds a lot of time and work to the process if it were to expire. And the expiry date is, I believe, April the draft plans expire in early April. I think it's April 2nd.
So what exactly is it that is causing them the delay?
I think it's all those things that I've outlined. Like there's a very detailed design process that has to be completed to get from an initial draft plan to the actual layout of the underground services, the grading, fencing, landscaping, the road profile, stormwater runoff and the stormwater pond design. So that's the process they've been going through for the past year. Last year at this time, we had just received the first engineering submission, and now we've got the third, which is pretty close to the final. So it's not uncommon for this to take this long, especially on a more challenging site where there are some grading and floodplain considerations that have to be dealt with, and some enhancement work that's required along the creek.
And have we had delays like this with any other applications? Because I don't recall any.
Yeah, I mean, so this draft plan was approved in 2018. And so we're here 4 years later, they're getting ready to pre-service. That's about the same timeline as the Scone and Fieldgate. Fieldgate was filed in about 2016, 2017, and they're now building the homes there. So it is a larger development at Fieldgate. Highland Village is another comparable. They had filed theirs in about 2015 and started building. They got their first building permits for homes in 2019. So a 4 to 5 year timeline from draft plan approval to actually being ready to service and develop the homes is pretty common. I think this one had some additional delays though, because the owner knew going in they weren't going to build the units. Like they had to actually get the draft plan designed and then go and market it to builders. And a few builders came and looked at it and then decided not to take it on. So that caused some delay in actually, having a builder lined up. And then once they had the builder lined up, they could commence the more detailed design work.
Sorry, Councilor Bernardo.
Sorry, where's the construction entrance going to be?
We're actually going to have a further conversation about that, but our thought is it would probably be in off of Centennial rather than having the trucks come in and out of Main Street because of the traffic there.
So it'll be coming on the floodplain?
No, there's a section of land there that is just outside of the floodplain, and actually they're going to do some, one of the conditions and one of the NVCA requirements is they have to do what's called a cut fill, where they raise part of the land there to provide that entrance off Centennial Road. And then to maintain the flood capacity of the creek, they have to cut some land, an equal amount of land from an existing part of the valley, so that you have the same water capacity within the valley for the Besley drain.
So how many trucks are we talking?
There's not as much fill required for this site as, for example, the Scone site, which had quite a bit of trucking activity over there. But we haven't been given an estimate of the total volume or the number of trucks or how frequent they'll come. What the agreement says is they have to give us all that information before anything is commenced, and that the town engineers have to sign off on a fill protocol. So haul route, access location, mud mat, protocols for keeping that all clean and safe, and then how many loads per day or how long it will take altogether.
So are we going to ban the trucks from coming down Main Street? Because I don't think the people on Main Street would like to have any more truck traffic.
Well, they'll have to either use Main Street or County Road 124. If they use County Road 124, they would come in off of Industrial Road over to Centennial and then in from the east side of the property. Otherwise, they would be just using Main Street to Centennial, as long as their construction access is located where I just mentioned off of Centennial.
Yeah, that's a pretty busy area. So do we control where they go in and out?
We can require them to put the construction access in one location. And if I'm hearing you correctly, I think you would prefer to have it off of Centennial rather than Main.
Off of Industrial, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of putting additional traffic on Main Street on that corner of 124 and 89, because that is a busy corner as it is right now. So that was my question for that reason for that question. Is there any trees going to be taken out as well in that area?
They did get approval last year to do the majority of the tree removals, and they've taken most of those down. The ones along the Besley Drain will be retained, and there'll be more planted along there. There are some stumps that still need to be pulled out from the trees that were cut last year, and some low vegetation to be removed. But I believe they got the majority of the trees that need removal out already.
So if we give approval tonight for a 1-year extension, when is the servicing going to start? Because I think that's where my fellow counselor was going with this reason for the extension. It seems like we've been waiting for something to happen over there. We've heard stories of the sales and everything else. So how long is it now going to be before something actually starts going into shovel to the ground if we get this approval?
There is no specific date that's been set. They wanted to make sure that they had the pre-servicing agreement and a final set of drawings before they obviously get a contractor out on site. And that is the typical process. So I can, once we have the pre-servicing agreement authorized, if that's council's will tonight, then I can report back with an update on their timing.
That would be really good. Thank you. That's all my questions.
I saw Councillor Wagner's hand, and then I'll go back to Councillor Buffett.
Thank you very much, Mary Mills. Yeah, so I don't know if this would be the proper time to sort of discuss this, or if it's just sort of a mention. I know we had discussed about the bridge, the pedestrian bridge. So I am under the assumption that the developer will be covering that cost entirely. You did mention that the trail beyond the bridge into Greenwood would be the responsibility of the town. So my concern there is that the community might argue why the taxpayers should have to cover that that trail when it wouldn't necessarily need to be developed, although obviously very good for, you know, continuing connectivity in the town. It just wouldn't necessarily need to be built, you know, if the development wasn't going into place. So is there any way to use, you know, the money that we receive in lieu of parkland or something like that in order to facilitate, you know, covering at least some of that cost or most of that cost to create that trail that would then connect that bridge with Greenwood? You know, obviously just to try to minimize the effect on taxpayers as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. The expectation would be that beyond the pedestrian bridge for this, what will become a town trail. So it's not really a trail for the development insofar as it's part of the town's trail network that's set out in the Parks Master Plan and the Active Transportation Plan. The implementation of the rest, though, I would expect would be probably entirely funded from development charges or a combination of development charges and cash in lieu of parkland funds. So coming from development sourced funds for the Greenwood Park portion.
Okay, awesome. Just kind of making sure the community knows that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Buffett.
Yes, I don't know whether you know the answer to this, Steve. Do you know if the developer has anything in their purchase and sale agreements that allow the buyers to get out of the agreement if it's delayed for any long period of time?
I don't know that. We don't have a copy of those purchase and sale agreements. We're not able to secure those from them until we get the subdivision agreement in place. Okay. And we will get a copy then and find that out. I do know that there are certain timelines that are typically set out in those, and I think there may be, because of the unique circumstances we've been in the past couple of years, there may be some flexibility there on allowing extended closings. I know that's been a common thing in many subdivisions developed over the past few years, is they've had to push closing dates out because of supply chain and labor shortages and a host of other issues.
Okay.
Steve, is there any flexibility with respect to the length of the extension? So I know the request is for 1 year. That's presumably based on the fact that we granted a 1 year extension last year. But I'm just wondering, I mean, if they don't in fact need the full year, I would rather, give a shorter window, but.
I think they will, to get to final approval of both the condominium and subdivision plans, it will take at least a year, because you can't actually register a condominium plan until the units are built. So the homes have to all be built and completed, and it's right before occupancy when that condominium final approval takes place. And I think you'll probably see an extension for Scone as well for that reason, is that theirs will expire later this year unless they are able to get the units built and the condominium plan registration completed before then. They do have the final subdivision plan. And all that means is that it carries on with a kind of a conditional status until the developments progress far enough along where it can be transferred to a condominium corporation. The 1 year is what we recommended because it is the typical minimum extension. Like an extension could be granted for up to 3 years under the act, but 1 year is a reasonable minimum. And by this time next year, should be ready for final approval of the subdivision component. But just so council's aware, I would expect the condominium corporation will push past another year.
Okay, and I'm fine with that. I mean, if that's sort of a reasonable time frame, that's okay. I didn't want to be granting a longer extension than what reasonably would be necessary. So, yeah. Anybody else for Steve? Okay, so the recommendation that's in the agenda is to grant the 2 extensions, and then also to enter into the pre-servicing agreement. Is there anybody that wants to make a motion in that regard? Deputy Mayor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Bonato. Any further discussion on that? Councillor Bonato, do you have a comment?
No.
Okay. I'll call the question then. All in favor? It's carried. Okay. Thanks, Steve. You're up again, I guess, for the next report, which is to discuss our comments with respect to the Dufferin County Land Needs Assessment.
Thank you. And I appreciate this report and its attachments is quite a bit of information for kind of receiving and digesting and commenting on in one night. So one discussion we have had at staff level is if council desires, you can take this back, and either a special meeting or the March 28th meeting, if that meeting's available, could be considered for further discussion or comments from council to relay back to the county. The county is requesting comments on this is probably one of the most significant components of the municipal comprehensive review, the land needs assessment, by March 31st. So all local municipalities have been given this information, and some have already gone to their council for some feedback and direction, and others I know are doing so in the next couple of weeks. So my report in the agenda package highlights.
Sorry, just before you jump in there, it looks like Councillor Bonato may have a question.
Go ahead.
Well, I had questions on the report, and I agree with our planner. I'd like more time on this particular report because there is a lot of questions in my mind on the report. I'm kind of wondering where the county and some parts of the report, where the heck they're coming from with their ideas. And I'd like to comment on those, but I need some time to continue going through that report. It was pretty extensive for something that came out with the whole of the agenda on a Thursday, and today is Monday. So, I mean, I've got another life besides council, and so I'd like some additional time on that. So I don't mind if a special meeting or another meeting date is proposed to go through. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I don't disagree. So I think we'll let Steve go through the report. I mean, that may answer some of our questions, but at the end of that, we can talk about some additional meeting time if necessary.
So what I'll try to do tonight then in the spirit of that conversation is just highlight the main implications that have emerged from this report in terms of Shelburne. Shelburne obviously has a significant role to play in the growth of the county over the next 30 years because it's one of only 3 fully serviced urban areas. And why you're seeing greater emphasis on Shelburne's role, I would say, than maybe in the past, is that Orangeville is virtually built out to its municipal boundary, and it is surrounded by the Greenbelt Plan, and the Greenbelt Plan has very strict limitations on urban expansion. So not only would they have to annex additional land from adjoining municipalities, they would have to work within the framework of the Greenbelt Plan, which is very confining on the size of any urban expansion. Grand Valley has more flexibility because they do have land within the same municipality around their urban area, but they have, not unlike Shelburne, some servicing constraints as well that they have to deal with to accommodate all this growth. So bear in mind that while these are some pretty bold directions from the county land needs assessment in terms of Shelburne's growth and how that could change going forward, it is a 30-year horizon that we're looking at. So it's not that growth is going to have to be fundamentally different and more dense than what you've seen in the past, overnight, but over the next 30 years, there would be a need for a different kind of style and form of development in certain parts of the town to achieve some of these targets. And so what this land needs assessment does is it takes the county-wide forecast for growth that the province has assigned to Dufferin County, which is to grow from about 69,000 people in 2021 to 95,000 in 2051. And the county has the responsibility to take those growth numbers and allocate them to the various local municipalities. They can't allocate less than that. So one thing that the province has made clear is that you have to at least work to this forecast we've given you, and you have to fully allocate it. You can't just leave some unallocated, and you can't use a lower number than what we've given you. It does give the option of going higher than that number, but you can't go lower. So the county has the challenge of trying to allocate those roughly 27,000 people to the local municipalities where there's only 3 fully serviced urban areas. And of course, the next direction is that is primarily to be accommodated within these fully serviced urban areas. It's not that you can put a large share of this growth in hamlets and community areas that only have private services or partial services. So that's one of the key reasons for Shelburne being one of the main focal points for growth, as it has been historically in the county. Shelburne is currently the 2nd largest population center. And as you know, we've been planning for a population of about 15,000 through infrastructure studies that Steve Burnett will talk about later in the agenda. And so actually the forecast that the county has drafted of 18,328 people by 2051 is pretty much in line with that 2041 forecast. The question really becomes whether the town can accommodate that additional 3,000 or so people in the last 10 years of that 30-year period within its current land base. Like, is there going to be enough land within Shelburne current municipal boundary to accommodate that growth? And that question really hasn't been fully answered yet. But what the report shows is what would have to be done in order to do that, like to get to that 18,000 mark. And it would have to occur gradually over time. It couldn't all be just left to the last 10 years of the forecast. So in order to get to that number, that the county has assessed using information that we've provided to them, how much growth can be accommodated based on development that's already approved or in process and remaining vacant land, including the West Urban Expansion Area and Flatos plans for that land, and how much additional growth would be needed. So in total, 3,054 new homes would be required in order to get to that 2051 population target. And like the past growth in Shelburne, that would have to be a balancing of outward growth, so growth in the kind of edges of town, with inward redevelopment. And that's that second part that is more of a change for Shelburne than what you've seen in the past. Because as time has worn on, the opportunity for more development within the downtown, within different parts of the existing built-up areas become more limited. You've seen the vacant properties get developed. Infill development has taken up existing vacant lots. more basement apartments and secondary units have come online. So the amount of intensification or redevelopment that Shelburne can accommodate is less than what it was, say, 10, 20 years ago. And the targets that the county has recommended or has put out there as a scenario for comment is that Shelburne would accommodate 48%, so almost half of those 3,000 homes within the current built up limits of Shelburne. So think of all the areas of Shelburne that already have homes and businesses and buildings. We would have to really intensify that, build upwards, redevelop existing buildings in order to get to 1,466 units added within that built up area over 30 years. So think about the existing built up area. It would get about 47 new homes per year on average. That actually isn't too far out of line with the average over the last, say, 10 years, but keep in mind the Highland Village subdivision is within that built up area. It was considered a built property before that subdivision went in. Half of the Greenbrook Village subdivision is in the built up area. So all of the big vacant properties have already been developed and there's not a lot left. There's a couple of larger sites, Stella Jones, if that property were ever to redevelop, which I would say is a long-term prospect, as well as the property west of Highland Village. Those are really the two largest potential intensification sites. Anything beyond that, we're talking about building larger, taller buildings within the existing built up area, primarily along Main Street from the downtown all the way out to 124 and up Owen Sound Street from the downtown north. Could be, we haven't, obviously fully visualized this, but we could be talking 4, 6, even 8-story buildings in order to achieve some of those targets over the longer term. The remainder of that growth, about 1,600 units, would be primarily by the expansion of the west side. So that's been in the works for many years already. We have a secondary plan. That's no surprise. It's probably about 600 to 700 units more than we thought could go on that west side. So not only are we talking about more intensification within the existing built up area, we're talking about more dense development. So more townhomes, more apartments and that kind of thing in the new development area on the west side. And again, this is what would be required to achieve that forecast within the current town boundary, assuming there's no additional land added to Shelburne via annexation. Because the MCR has been clear all along that it is not the process for considering any municipal boundary adjustments. It's only about urban boundaries within your current municipal boundary. So what this may point to is that there may be a longer term need for additional land to be considered to be added to Shelburne's boundary to accommodate a portion of this growth, but that's not something that the county will specifically deal with or recommend through their process. On the employment side, the county is recommending that the employment growth forecast, which is about 3,380 new jobs out over the next 30 years, a little over 100 jobs per year, will be required, can be accommodated within the existing remaining industrial, commercial, and institutional lands, as well as work at home jobs, and what we refer to as no fixed place of work jobs, which is, think of like a tradesperson who travels out to different sites to work, or a construction worker. That's what that category refers to. So the county is estimating that we have in Shelburne sufficient land already to accommodate that, but that as the west side grows, we should look at opportunities to include some commercial land, which is something we were looking at anyways. So I'm not as concerned about the industrial and employment side. There is a lack of available vacant industrial land because it has all been put into ownership that they eventually want to develop it, but we don't know how long they're going to sit on the land until some of that remaining land in the industrial park is actually developed. So the real estate sector is certainly telling us we don't have any industrial land left, even though the reality is we do have some vacant industrial land left that just hasn't been built on yet. It's just not on the real estate market. So Probably not surprisingly, that the key direction from the land needs assessment is that Shelburne should expand its urban boundary to include the remaining land within the west side. That will add land for additional housing as well as commercial uses, and possibly a further school site will be needed as well. The school board has identified that that's a likely need in the next few years, depending on the pace and volume of residential growth. I was surprised to see that the counties recommended that there's a surplus of 10.3 hectares of industrial employment land. I think that that is a reflection of the employment density that they're assuming. So in other words, the number of jobs per hectare of land. We've seen a fairly low density of employment with recent industrial developments. There is some capacity within existing industries to continue to expand and grow. And for example, the new bottling facility has future plans to expand. But I don't think there's any opportunity to look at the current industrial land base that remains and think of a different use, such as residential, because it's the land remaining is already surrounded by existing industry and in a serviced industrial area. So we would recommend that council not consider converting any of the remaining industrial land to residential use, for example, whereas the county has recommended that that is something that should be considered. So there are 5 questions that the county has posed to facilitate some feedback from the local municipalities. And I think I've already summarized where my comments are at in terms of some of the main highlights and some of my concerns. We haven't fully, considered or analyzed what this means in terms of future building heights and densities in the existing built up area, for example. And for the west side of Shelburne, if it's really realistic to expect that the additional growth identified here can be accommodated. And we do have a concern with that recommendation about employment land conversion and that there's a surplus of employment land. So I've captured those kind of 3 or 4 issues in the response that I've drafted to those questions. But the purpose of the presentation and report tonight is really to get council's opportunity for kind of digesting this information and then giving me some feedback if you want anything added from council in terms of comments or questions or concerns that you would like the county to look at before they finalize the report. So just to wrap things up, the next steps will involve the county taking the feedback from the local municipalities, then finalizing the allocations of the population and employment numbers to the local municipalities, then preparing probably a draft official plan amendment to adjust the urban boundaries in the county official plan. Not quite sure what the timing is for that, but the province was looking for municipalities to have an amendment brought forward for provincial approval by middle of this year, so about June, July 2022. I will note that the additional growth and density, as I've highlighted here, will require some of the servicing work that has been done and transportation master planning and parks and recreation master planning to think about that. Council may be wondering, well, what does this mean for all this good infrastructure planning we've been doing for our 2041 population? It doesn't mean that that's out of line or that needs to stop or needs to be revisited. As I mentioned, going out to 2051, we really keep the same kind of trajectory of growth that we've already been planning for. It just looks another 10 years out. So at some point over the next 10, 20 years, these infrastructure plans that are currently being prepared and updated by SPA and others would need to be revisited again for that remaining kind of 10 years. But it doesn't mean there should be any notion of stopping or pausing on those and revisiting the growth that they're planning for. I also just wanted to note too, it was raised by staff, a good point that I've highlighted here, that additional growth and density will put more pressure on transportation options and transit in particular. And I didn't note in my report, but of course there is an existing transit service through Grey County. And I believe it's in place for at least the next 5 years. So that's a great start. And I think having that continue for the future growth, you'll just see increased need for those kinds of options. and potentially even more options. So there's no immediate financial impact, but obviously we're going to take this further as it becomes more detailed and look at what it really means for the various areas that are remaining in Shelburne's land base for development, and continue to participate in the county process to provide our feedback and input on behalf of the town. So I'll pause there, and you'll see there's a copy of the county's overall summary report in the agenda as well. And if you have any immediate questions, happy to try and answer them for you.
Okay. Councillor Bernardo.
Always have a question. So if we want to pull in more land from surrounding municipalities, how long will it take to put that into the urban boundary?
It could take a long time. So if you look at the land that was last annexed by the town, it was 2002. So here we are 20 years and we're finally getting to that point. I would say the main reason for that is at that time, it wouldn't have been thought it would take that long because the policy framework and the provincial plans were different at that time. But since then, the province has really clamped down on urban expansions. Pendulum seems to be swinging back the other way now, where there's a huge pressure on trying to bring more housing on faster to try and make housing more affordable. So there could be more provincial support for that kind of thing to do it more quickly. And of course, we're in an election year, so that will probably dictate some things as well in terms of the provincial direction going forward. I will emphasize that if there's any, thought towards adding more land to Shelburne's municipal boundary, that really would need to be a council-initiated process, and it isn't something that you should wait for the county to spearhead, for example, because the county's already said that's not part of their MCR. That's not part of what they're looking at. So it would really take Shelburne's initiative to kickstart that.
So that's one of the reasons I was thinking of pushing this off because I got a gut feeling that I'm not prepared to see 6-story buildings in smaller, we're already at 35-foot lots. I don't need to see 20-foot lots, 6-foot tall buildings on 20-foot lots, and a whole bunch more townhouses than what we've already been looking at within the framework of the community. And I'm kind of also concerned about the industrial land when you're quite correct, there is no industrial land available at this point in time. So if we as a council decide to start annexing land around, we also have to talk to our neighbors about it. So that also takes time. So that's something that I think if we're going to do something of that nature, it needs to be done now, not a year or two down the road. That's the comment.
Yeah, no, and it's a fair point. I mean, certainly big numbers to consider. And, if we have to absorb these numbers, as Steve indicated, one approach is through intensification and more increased density. And to a point, I think that's okay, and that's probably responsible, but I also agree with you, Walter, that, there are some limits to that. And, I don't think it's unreasonable to question whether or not we can meet those targets only through further intensification and density. So, I mean, for my part, I think one of the key things that we have to consider is, allowing flexibility for Shelburne going forward. That there is going to be quite a philosophical debate, I think, at the county level between kind of the more urban municipalities and some of the rural municipalities as to whether or not that's needed. We'll see how that plays out sort of in the fullness of time, but I know there are already some strong opinions emerging at county council about that. And that's fine. I mean, that's why we go through these kinds of processes to have those discussions. In terms of setting aside some additional time to discuss this, it kind of seems to me that we have two options. We could either call a special meeting next Monday, which is our off council night, or we could start earlier on the 28th before our next regular council meeting. I'm fine either way. I know starting earlier might be difficult on some. Any thoughts one way or another? Councillor Hall?
I would be more inclined to call a special meeting for it, only because based on the timeline that the planners already provided to us, we've got to get a response back fairly quick. And backing that up to that point, I don't think gives us the best opportunity for us to put what we need to forward.
I'm sure Steve would appreciate that extra week too. Councillor Buffett?
Yeah, I had the same opinion. I think we'd be better off having the time spent to focus on that alone and have a lot of really good debate about it.
Okay. Does that work for everybody? If we meet next Monday at 6:30, like, you know, it's regular council meeting time? Okay. All right. Jennifer, can we go ahead then and put notice of that meeting out?
Yes, sir.
Anything else for Steve at this point, or we'll just sort of continue to digest this for another week and then come next Monday armed with questions and comments? All right. Okay. Oh, sorry. Councillor Wagner.
Yes, thanks so much. Just because it kind of was discussed today, for any community members watching or whatnot, just a kind of a quick question. Is this, you know, just I guess, again, for information, is this partly the reason why when, you know, the community says council, you know, isn't stopping development, that we can't, we just don't have that power because, you know, this is sort of, you know, told to us that it's expected through the county and whatnot. Just very quickly, just to sort of touch base on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, there is an obligation once the county official plan is updated with these numbers and boundaries, et cetera, that the Planning Act of Ontario says not only does the local official plan, so the town's official plan, have to mirror those numbers and those boundaries and plan for that, has to conform with the growth plan and how that planning takes place. So once those targets are set, once those growth numbers are set, once those boundaries are set in the county OP, there is a requirement legally for the town to amend its official plan to adapt for that. I would say there's no obligation, however, on Shelburne to try to build infrastructure that it can't afford, or, you know, to you know, financially harm the municipality by trying to do things at the wrong time or at the wrong scale. So all of this growth is ultimately contingent upon the ability to fund the necessary infrastructure, which depends on a variety of factors. Yep.
Okay, thank you so much.
And just to extend that, you know, one step further, you know, the growth targets originate from the province first, and then sort of flow to the county, and then from there to us. So, you know, sort of direction from on high, and everybody down below has to kind of follow suit. But to Steve's point, I think it's a key one, and I mean that was part of the argument I made to Minister Surma a few weeks ago when Denise and I had a meeting with her, was that, you know, when it comes to infrastructure upgrades, you know, sure, yeah, we're willing to do our part to try to meet these targets that are imposed by the province, but in order to do that, you know, we're going to need some help from the province to fund those infrastructure projects, and it's certainly not fair to fund all of those on the backs of the existing taxpayers. So hopefully that message carried some weight, and we'll see where that goes. But okay, if there's nothing else for tonight, can I just get a motion then to receive Steve's report at this point, and then we can give further direction next Monday? Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Hall. All in favor? It's carried. Okay, thanks, Steve. Okay, next report is from our other Steve Burnett. We'll talk about sewage capacity allocation. How are you, sir?
Doing great.
Good.
So we have, similar to the planning group, the engineering group has several reports to get through this evening as well. So we'll try and move through in a quick fashion. And if council has any questions along the way, by all means, try and address those when they come up. So our first report is the sewage capacity allocation report. At this point, we're bringing this forward for the year ending in 2021. And again, I won't get into all the details and go through each piece of it, but we were, I guess, happy to see that maybe some of the return to work and the spike that we did see in 2020 due to COVID had sort of balanced out to some degree. And ultimately, we did see an equalization of the flows at that point. Flipping to the very last page, which really is the portion that is important to council, I think, to fully understand, is this year's average, or sorry, the 2021 average flow was calculated to be 2,667 cubic meters a day, which is in comparison to the 3,420 cubic meters per day that the existing water pollution control plant is designed to handle. That leaves a existing capacity of 753 cubic meters of available sewage capacity. To date, we have already allocated the current projects that are ongoing and that Steve and myself have talked about in the past, and that total amount of allocation and also the contingencies for private septics, et cetera, that we have to hold there comes to 428. Sorry, without the allocations comes to 428. When we do all of the allocations within the stages that have already been approved through subdivision agreements or site plan approval, we are left with 19 cubic meters of sewage capacity moving forward. So just to bring that into context, that equates to approximately 18 residential units and 0.14 hectares of ICI if we maintain that sort of 80-20 split that has generally been the split between commercial and institutional and residential within the town. So based on that, we're in a very similar position that we found ourselves last year, where there's a very limited capacity left, and all of the projections going forward, very similar to what Steve had just presented, will be dependent on an expansion to the water pollution control plant. To bring it into context and again to show the amount of demand that is there is approximately 671 cubic meters of demand that is already within the system or already identified moving forward with projects that are at different stages of development for Shelburne. So that would put us in a substantial negative for sewage allocation, and hence the need for that project, which council has already endorsed the design work moving forward for. So I guess the only other component that we did want to bring forward to council and just get resolution on is, you had heard Steve talk about earlier that there was an established 10 cubic meters a day that we did establish for these smaller potentially apartment units and one-off situations last year. We would like to reestablish that again for the coming year. A portion of that was used and a portion of it remains available, but we would like to reestablish that just so that it doesn't become a bottleneck for council moving forward on some of those smaller requests. So I won't get too much more into it, guys. I know there's a lot of information still to go through this evening, so I think that sums it up. That where we are at the end of 2021, and I'll open the floor to any questions or concerns.
Thanks, Steve. Councillor Bernardo.
So if we have a really extremely wet year, which has happened in the past on us, we have enough reserve capacity in the plant for that?
So what we've established through your worship to Councillor Bernardo, we've established a contingency for that exact reasoning. It is noted within the stabilization of flows category. So we do have a 150 cubic meter contingency for that exact reason. And we came very close to using that in previous years, as Councillor Bernardo has said. So we do feel that gives us some grace, but we're getting awful tight. That's for sure.
So we're getting really tight. And why do we need to reestablish a reserve for the small apartments? The reserve that's currently been left over is, you want more than that? I'm trying to understand what you're asking.
Yeah, so I guess all we're asking is that 10 cubic meters a day gives us a good round number to be able to work against when small things come forward. So it's a little more difficult as far as with those unit apartments and different ones it's percentages of cubic meters. So maybe Steve, if you want to comment a little bit more on that, but it was more just continuing the establishment of that reserve. That's all.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So there was that 10 cubic meter reserve from last year, and in the minor variance report tonight, you saw that it was about 1/3 has been used. So leaving 2/3. What we would do is put that 1/3 back again. So it's not a full 10 coming back into the allocation. It's just topping it back up so that if we get another 10, 20, 30 units this year, depending on the unit types, we could accommodate that. I know one project specifically that was in mind in making this recommendation that council has expressed some interest in making sure it can be accommodated, and I think makes sense from last year's allocation review. Is there's the Block 7 development, which is at the south end of the Scone plan, and they do have a plan that they've been meeting with me on for 11 units there. So if we don't top up the remaining capacity back to the 10 cubic meters per day, that plan really comes into question. Now, it doesn't stop council from making a special allocation later in the year. It gives greater confidence to applicants like that they can carry on moving forward with their plans.
So just to get my mind a little clear, if we top up 1/3 and we're tight to the limited amount that we have left over, how much more can we continue to top up 1/3 year after year for these smaller apartments? I just sort of trying to figure out, when do we reach the end? When is it's done?
Yeah, and I'll maybe try and answer that one. At this point, as Steve said, it would probably be removing about 3 or 4 cubic meters from that 19. So we felt that was a conservative approach to still have that 10 cubic meters. Similar to the previous discussion, though, we will continue to monitor this on a yearly basis, and that may discontinue in a subsequent year. The goal was ultimately not to have a large portion of these small one-offs or apartment type ones really backing up while we move through the design and ultimate construction of the expansion to support these other much larger developments. But that is the recommendation that we've put forward as a team.
And I think, one of the key checks and balances to this is what we saw earlier tonight with the minor variance application, and it's sort of become our practice, is that any of those requests are granted conditionally upon them receiving confirmation that there is in fact enough allocation there. So I mean, certainly going forward, I think that's a practice that this council and any future council should continue until until our allocation problems are solved more permanently. But okay. Anything else? Oh, Councilor Bernardo, do you have something else?
No, that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else for Steve? Okay. Can I have a motion then to approve Steve's report and to confirm that we will continue the established allocation allowance of 10 cubic meters a day to allow for those smaller infill developments? Moved by Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Bernardo. All in favor? It's carried. Okay, Steve, you're up again on the public information meeting.
Yeah, so on this next one, I'll probably have Ian Callum from our office join me as well. He's been very instrumental in helping through on the EA work moving forward. But just to summarize what we're bringing forward here, ultimately, as council is aware, there are 3 class environmental assessments that are currently ongoing within the town of Shelburne at this point in time. The first one is a water supply EA, which is a Schedule B project. We are not bringing that one in front of council tonight. There's some work still to be completed in the spring with work that we are doing on well 1, and once that is complete, we will bring an updated public information center presentation forward to council, probably late spring, early summer. We are bringing forward this evening the 3rd and final public presentation for the water pollution control plant EA, which is a Schedule C EA assessment, which means that we had to not only circle through the planning alternatives, but we also had to go through the design alternatives. And Ian will walk us through that. We'll try and do it at a very high level for council, unless there's specific concerns, because we know you'll have a long night. So we'll try and skip through just the highlighted boards and the ones that'll be important to council, letting council know that the entire package is there, because we are bringing the public up to speed on all the work that has been ongoing. And then lastly, we are also bringing forward the water wastewater master servicing plan. And so if you think of each of the water EAs as sort of the supply and treatment of water, the sewage EA is the treatment and disposal of the sewage. The master servicing plan is really the connection between the two, and how you're getting flows from one side of town to the other, or transporting either the water or sewage. So that's the second presentation, and that one is the first public presentation that'll be coming forward on that one that we will be going over. So at this point, unless council has any questions, I'll maybe turn it over to Ian to sort of talk us through the presentations at that high level. And if council has any questions along the way, Ian and I are both here to either answer or address those questions.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Steve. Just pull that up. I can share a presentation here. I can just confirm everyone can see that okay? Yeah, okay, great. Perfect. Thank you very much. So as Steve said, we're going to start with the water pollution control Schedule CEA. This slide's just a short summary to indicate where we are in the process right now. You can see, as Steve said, that we've worked through the alternative solutions, which gave us the preferred solution of upgrading the current facility. And then we've moved on to look at some different design options about how we would design that upgrade. And once we get through, we're pretty much through that step now, and we're ready to move on to PIC number 3, as Steve alluded to, and go to the public and agencies with that. went through just a number of, as Steve said, I'm going to move through this pretty quickly unless there's some real highlight slides here to go through. But basically to come up with those different design alternative solutions, we had a set number of criteria that we used. It is based, as Steve Weaver alluded to earlier this evening, on the 2041 15,000 population, and then basically the flows and the max flow data sort of came from that number there. I think everybody here probably is pretty familiar with the location of the water pollution control plant. So basically this slide here is a summary of the alternative design that were brought forward as the preferred alternative design solutions and their associated costs. And basically this is a summary of what we came up with. There's a lot more detail on some of the upcoming slides about how we got to that point. But this is basically what we came up with as based on our studies. We wanted to have a slide here that highlighted the odor issue, noting that this has been, you know, a pretty high-profile issue in the community. And so we looked at basically the reasons for the odor historically. And the primary reason for that was an undersized primary and secondary sludge digester. And so the planned upgrade that we would propose moving forward with would be to add sludge thickening before digesters to reduce the amount of sludge requiring digestion. We'd also be constructing new properly sized digesters and a new biosolids tank as well to address that primary source where the odor had been coming from. We would be proposing to continue use of the pond for untreated wastewater during peak flow events. And these are the type of events that really we're talking about maybe once or twice a year. We would be reducing considerably the use from what they're used right now by the construction of a new equalization tank that would significantly reduce the frequency of usage of one of those ponds. And it would basically entirely change the function of the other pond, which would be used only to store treated wastewater in a type of emergency situation, say where it might not meet, where it was treated but didn't quite meet effluent requirement limits, discharge limits. Then you could store it there and then run it back through the plant basically at a better time. I'm really not going to spend a lot of time on these two slides here, but these two slides here really just show all the detailed stages of the water pollution control plant that were assessed and the different alternatives that were looked at, the preferred alternative, and how we came to what that preferred alternative was. Obviously, we'd spend a little bit more time maybe with the public on that one during the Public Information Center. Likewise, on the following slides, really, we just spent some time highlighting how we came to the decisions around secondary treatment because it's a big cost item and it also influences effluent quality quite a bit. So we did spend a fair time in the public presentation on how we came to that decision of, in this case, going with a membrane technology as opposed to the extended air that's currently used at the facility. So really, we just used a number of different symbols here to compare the different options of extended air membrane and another IFAS technology. Green showing that this is for each of these criteria is the best option, yellow being it's kind of in the middle, and red being it's the lesser of the three options from those points of view. So we looked at technical criteria, environmental criteria, social criteria, and as well as the cost, the economic criteria, and then came up with a summary slide, which clearly shows that the membrane technology was the best option from a secondary treatment standpoint. From there, we end up with a layout that basically is a map, like a layout map illustration of the preferred design that we came up with. Not too much really that we really need to focus on here tonight, but I would bring your attention to the fact that one of the biosolid storage tanks shown in a dark blue there is on top of, I guess, existing leased land. But my understanding is that that's already been agreed upon, that that would no longer be leased out. But I just wanted to bring your attention to that. Also, just quickly highlighting the fact, this is also for the public, just to bring them up to speed, that a new RV dump would be relocated from Fiddle Park, and that this service would be offered at no cost to Shelburne residents, but at a fee for visitors. We're still working on the exact location of where that would be, but that would be probably addressed a little bit more in detailed design. Again, this is just highlighting where, for those who don't know, where the discharge for the water pollution control plant is, and that it moves from a discharge point in the Besley drain, as shown in the photograph there and on the map, and then moving into the Boyne River. As we've already alluded to a little bit, our next step really is to move forward with PIC number 3. After that, we would be in a position to finalize the report and issue a notice of completion. And we'd be looking at implementing a monitoring plan prior to construction to help set a baseline from which we can monitor against once the plant is up and running. And SBA is currently working in concert with NVCA on implementing that monitoring plan, which will be up and running this summer. And then we're looking at about a year of design and 2 years of construction for that facility, for that upgrade. So I'll pause there on that one and ask if there's any questions at this point.
Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Sorry about that. Thank you. You were quite correct in identifying that one of the major issues when it comes to the plant is the smell. And unfortunately or fortunately, my house is very close. So I've had the misfortune of having my nostrils filled with the perfume emanating from the plant. My question is with respect to the upgrades, because I think this would be an important question, and I'm sure members of the public have this in mind. Will the upgrades that you're proposing, I'm assuming this is recent technology, the digesters that you talked about, will this address that issue completely, or is that unrealistic? Is this just another mitigating sort of step, but we could still expect that on occasion that smell will be there? I'm sure that members of the public have that question in mind, so whatever answer you could provide would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just you got more experience on the engineering of these, Steve. I'll let you jump in here.
Yeah, that's fine. And through you, Your Worship, to the Deputy Mayor, the goal is to address the odor issues with this upgrade. I'm not going to say that it'll 100% remove odor. It is a sewage treatment plant. There is the odd chance that there will still be smells at the sewage treatment plant. But we have, through this exercise, really identified the culprits or the processes that are causing, I'll almost call it a nasty effect from smell. The digesters are significantly undersized in the existing facility. That is one of the items that Ian brought forward and has been identified through this process. So just properly sizing that in the expansion is going to make a big difference. The biosolids are also undersized, and during that transportation portion and removing of the biosolids, there have been some issues as well. So we're hoping to really address that with proper engineering and design and construction as well. The other thing is the way the plant has been operated in the past is anytime there was a peak, it was always going up to the ponds, as we refer to them. So there's always, during those big events, raw sewage that is going out to those ponds. As Ian indicated, well, we're not going to be able to eliminate every single day because there's kind of a cost balance factor there. The goal is to get that down to 1 to 2 days, maybe 3 days a year, where that has to happen just because of those February ice melts or those big storm events. And then the rest of the time there will be an equalization tank that is there up front. That is a tank. It's not exposed. It's not right there when people are having their barbecues on their back deck, sort of thing, and really trying to address that issue. So if somebody tells you to make it go away 100%, they're lying, but our goal is to address it as much as possible to really eliminate the issues that residents such as yourself have faced.
And just very quickly as a follow-up on Mayor Mills, if you don't mind. And this is part of the expansion upgrade and the cost of, we've all seen the sticker shock to that. And I'm sure, Steve, you're working on this because, as you guys have recognized, it is a major deal in town. Is there anything that could be done in the interim, any additional steps? Because we're still talking about a few years away, and most people do want to get back outside and start doing some stuff. And you're right, nobody wants to barbecue with that smell there. So, are there any other mitigating steps that could be taken to address that?
So there are some things that ourselves, town staff and Aqua are working together to try and address and look at some of those. And I think there have been some improvements already. Timing of different things, the way different items are dealt with. There's even a small pilot project that we're looking at, and Aqua's been engaging and moving forward to kind of look at some options that way. But I will be open and honest that the heart of the odor coming from that undersized digester being an open area is very difficult to address without large capital funds associated with the upgrade. So some of these interim things are definitely being implemented, are definitely going to improve things compared to maybe what it was a couple of years ago. But we are handcuffed a little bit as far as some of those undersized items, for sure.
Just for the benefit of my own understanding, Steve, the digester, is that sort of that open pit area, like at the back, which is close to Home Hardware?
No, it would actually be the open pit that's the small area right behind the main office building, if you recall, being in that area. And so the open ones that you're referring to are is the aeration, that's the main sort of treatment area. Yeah, that's a great sort of way to pull the map back up again there. So it would really be tucked in right behind the Headworks building there is where that is.
And is that the area that's sort of covered with screening? That there's like a walkway over top of it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Okay. Councillor Bernardo.
Having gone through this a few times in the past on expansions and these Class C needs, Ministry of Environment, how fast are we able to get approval from those people? Because they're sometimes the hold up more than anybody else.
So through you, Mayor Mills, to Councillor Bernardo, one of the large holdups that we generally find through this process is approval of the simulated capacity study. And that has now been approved by the ministry. It was actually approved 2 springs ago now, I think, if I really figure it out. And that is the major hiccup. I'm not going to say that there isn't a review process from the ministry, and that will take time. Right now, that process is somewhere in the 4 to 6 month range, depending on how complicated the design is. But we have sort of accounted for getting information to them when it's available, and that'll be part of that process.
So we're keeping them up to date, is what you're saying, with what we're trying to do.
That's the plan, to be fair.
So they're not getting anything and without realizing what's already coming toward them.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on this one, or we okay for Ian to move on to the next one? All right, looks like we're good.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm just gonna pull. Okay, perfect. So as indicated, the second presentation that we'll be walking through tonight is the Water Wastewater Master Servicing Plan Class EA. As Steve indicated earlier, this one is a Class B, a Schedule B EA. So it has a few less steps involved in that. We are just sort of getting moving on this one in terms of we've gone through everything and we've come up with the alternative solutions. There is only one mandatory PIC for this one, and I think we'll maybe just see how things go to see whether a second one's warranted or not. So yeah, this slide here, I'm sure you're all been through this process enough times to know the different phases of the Class EA process. But this is just to highlight that we are currently just finishing up evaluating the alternative solutions right now, and that we would be moving to public consultation as the next stage. Really, this slide is just to show that in evaluating different options for water and wastewater servicing, we did look at the approved developments based on the 15,000 population, as well as taking into consideration a known planned developments. From there, just a mandatory step that we need to do in the Class EA world in terms of coming up with a problem opportunity statement. So the opportunity statement for water being that the town of Shelburne needs to update the 2003 master servicing plan to ensure that infrastructure is in place to provide a safe supply of water that meets the town's needs for the next 20 years. And based on that, we just drilled down a little bit more to look at water supply, water quality, water storage, and water distribution and demand. And in terms of work that basically, we know that there's a water supply issue. I show that a little bit better on another slide coming up, but there's a Schedule B Class EA in progress that is looking at how to help the town meet its future water supply. From a water quality point of view, once the upgrades to well 1 and 3 are completed, we don't foresee any additional work needed around water quality. Water storage based on hydraulic model analysis, again, for a water storage and fire flow standpoint, once that new water tower is up and running, we don't foresee any issues on that front. On the water distribution and demand, Steve, can you jump in just for a second on this one? I think we managed to find a way around the velocity one not being an issue anymore. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a few modeling exercises that the team are working through, and some of those modeling exercises look at high velocities within existing pipes, age of pipes, and then any bottlenecks within the system. So there were a few areas identified near the existing water tower, but these have subsequently been accepted. So it's really we're honing in on the areas where there's maybe some aged pipe and some bottlenecks, and ultimately those will be the areas identified coming out of this study that any of those areas that may need to be upgraded.
Right. And all of that work from an EA standpoint would fall under a Schedule A maintenance category, which is pre-approved under the Class EA process. From a water supply standpoint, this map here just showing the locations of the production wells that provide the water supply for the town of Shelburne. This slide here just sort of highlighting some of the ongoing work around these wells. From a PW1, the air entrainment issue has been resolved, and the town Aqua and SB are currently working on a flushing plan for the chlorine tank to resolve some turbidity issues that we encountered, but looking to bring that well back online in the spring of 2022 after confirming a sustainable pumping rate, which will require a 72-hour pumping test. For PW3, it's scheduled to be back online in spring 2023 following some water treatment improvements and adding a new well pump with connection to VFD. And also we're going to be adding some absorption filters and UV system to improve the water quality there. For PW7 and 8, ongoing, we're moving forward with the EA and the associated source water protection work that will allow those 2 wells to be able to be pumped concurrently. And, you know, right now you have only one of those wells being able to pump at a time and the other one serving as a backup. So there will be an additional well, PW9, that will need to be installed in 2023 as a backup for when those 2 wells are able to pump concurrently.
Sorry, Ian, that'll be at the same location as 7-8?
That is correct, yes. Yeah, and it'll be pure, it'll never be allowed to run only as unless as a backup.
Yeah, okay.
And basically this this graph here really is to show our current water supply is the horizontal line at the top. Or actually, sorry, that's the estimated water supply in 2023 once we've done all these little short-term upgrades. The lower line is what currently is able to be supplied, and the yellow line being the max day flow. So you can see that for right now, we aren't able to meet max day flow until these the current upgrades at PW1 and PW3 are brought online. But once those are online, there's no issues until about 2036, at which point you will start running into some supply issues again. I would highlight that in the past, when looking for wells 7 and 8, it was a process that took roughly 5 years, with about $5.3 million of capital costs, and then roughly another $1 million in engineering design costs on top of that. So I just wanted to highlight that. So come 2031, that's part of what we'll need to be looking at. From there, we move on to wastewater. Our problem opportunity statement being that the town of Shelburne needs to update its 2003 master servicing plan to ensure that infrastructure is in place to provide adequate transport and treatment of wastewater to meet the town's needs for the next 20 years. I think we'll move through those. Just again, highlighting the different categories for wastewater that we looked at in this EA in terms of wastewater treatment, pumping stations, and trunk line capacity. Wastewater treatment is basically being currently dealt with in the Schedule C Class EA that I just completed presenting. In terms of looking at pumping stations, and we've got some more slides to go into this in a little bit more detail. This slide's here really just in terms is intended as a summary. But the Fiddle Glen pumping station will not be able to manage planned flows at this time, and that would need to be addressed with a Schedule A+ EA. So no formal EA, but the next step would be to do a feasibility study for the pumping station, and then there would be some public consultation requirements under that Schedule A+ that would need to be fulfilled. In terms of trunk line capacity, and again, I've got some maps coming up and some additional slides here that show where these locations are, but some of the trunk lines are currently at or near capacity, and with the additional known planned growth, there'll be some additional trunk lines that'll be brought into those categories of being close to or at capacity. And addressing those would also fall under a Schedule A+ EA requirement, Class EA requirement. This slide here really is just to show the different wastewater pumping station catchment areas for the town of Shelburne. In the southern portion, you have that part of town flowing through gravity flow to the water pollution control plant. You've got the Fieldgate area flowing into the Fieldgate forest main there. And to the north, you've got that area flowing into the Fiddle Glen forest main, the Fiddle Glen forest main connection. And then the Highland one flowing into a pump station in the southeastern part there, with that area near the green catchment area. So this slide just provides a little bit more detail on the current capacity of the Fiddle Glen pumping station, the 110 liters per second. And with the development of Flatto phases 1 to 4 and subsequent development around of external lands around Flatto, that results in those two numbers of 149 and 170, which exceed the current capacity of 110. And that would need to be addressed through some improvements there. This slide here just shows some of the areas that are currently, the areas in orange are areas that are 80%, that are over 80%, but within 100% of existing capacity. And the red ones are ones that are over 100% capacity under current conditions. So you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, well, 5 different areas that are covered within town boundaries there that fall under that category of being currently bottlenecks for flow of wastewater. And these are the additional bottlenecks that would occur through known and planned developments. And finally, we just, through the work that we're doing with NVCA, the town is looking at supporting some stewardship opportunities along the Boyne River and in its tributaries. And basically that work is ongoing along the same time frame as the monitoring work that we're doing with NVCA right now. And that'll also be summarized in this EA. In terms of next steps, as we pretty much already covered it, we would be doing at least another public information center coming up likely in May, finalizing that EA report with a notice of completion for that EA in early summer of 2022. And that's the end of the formal presentation there. If there are any questions.
Just in terms of those identified bottleneck areas, what I understand, you're going to do some inspections this year. What's the solution for those?
Over to you, Steve.
Yeah, I'll maybe jump in there. So ultimately, the way sanitary sewers are sized is the largest diameter or largest pipe is closest to the sewage treatment plant, and then you work your way outwards from there to the extremities of the community. So ultimately, there was designers that made their best guesstimates X number of years ago, 40 some years ago when the first plant went in, and then works your way through. So the only way to really address those bottlenecks are through a capital upgrade project of upsizing or increasing those pipe sizes to address that future development. So that's why this master servicing program is so important. And the last time, as Ian said, that the town went through this was in 2003, and it did identify some great areas and how different components of expansion would get either water or sewage or capacity. But we're now going through that process again, just to look at those upgrades. So yeah, that really is the only way to address it is upsizing those sections of pipe, and that's why they're kind of identified in sections between manholes as well.
So does that mean ripping up the road and actually physically replacing the pipe that's there. Yeah. Okay.
It would, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anything else for Steve or Ian, Deputy Mayor Anderson?
Thank you. And this is for either Ian or Steve. And this may be a silly question, but I'm looking at the report where you talked about monitoring 282 iron pipes and pipes that are 50 years old or greater. With the exception of being concerned, obviously, about leakage, with the age and the erosion of these pipes, should we be concerned about the impact on the quality of the water or its impact on the quality of water? And if yes, do we have these filters in place that would address that? So I just wanted to know if that's something that we should be thinking about, in addition to just looking at leakage.
So I'll maybe address this as well through you, Your Worship. Ultimately, Aqua is monitoring the water quality perspective, so we do not anticipate a quality issue at this point. But what does happen with that older infrastructure, especially with the cast iron pipes, is it can start to rust from the inside and actually get smaller. And I have seen in some instances where that pipe you can cut through an 8-inch pipe, and you'd have trouble getting a golf ball through the pipe after several years. So the monitoring program and that is all about the town looking at future infrastructure, checking in on aged infrastructure, trying to really check those flows, make sure both water quantity and quality can be achieved. So I don't think right now there is a quality issue, but obviously if you're not getting flows or if you're getting stagnant flows, that can lead to quality issues, but that's not identified as a concern right now.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, anything else? All right. Well, thanks, guys. It was a lot of information, but presented in a way that I think was as understandable as it could be for lay people like us. So, can I get a motion to receive the report regarding the Class EA updates and the Public Information Center presentations? Moved by Councillor Buffett, seconded by Councillor Bernardo. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, before we move on to the next one, I think we could all probably use a quick break here to refresh. So let's try to be back by, what is it, 8:40, 8:50.